Hi, my name is Denise Downey, and I'm an assistant professor of accountancy at the Villanova School of Business. Today I'm going to present my final report for my Vital Minigrant, which is entitled A Teaching Case Designed to Facilitate Student Learning of Audit Sampling. Before I begin, I should probably tell you that I primarily teach juniors and seniors in our first auditing course, and this course is designed to get students ready for careers in public accounting and consists primarily of a very qualitative, theoretical auditing concepts. And so today I'm going to be telling you more about how I have addressed audit sampling in this course. So what was the problem that I was trying to solve by designing this case and applying for the Vital Minigrant? Well, sampling is an important aspect of audit testing. When you think about a company's financial statements, even with the prevalence of data analytics, public accountants cannot test 100% of the financial transactions that show up or are represented on the company's financial statements. So as a result, auditors often employ sampling. However, staff auditors, who our students become when they graduate, as well as our students, possess an incomplete knowledge of sampling techniques and do not really understand how poor sampling can affect the overall audit. And this has been shown in prior educational resources. Because sampling is a difficult topic, textbook coverage of sampling is often very technical and very abstract. So auditing as a theoretical subject matter is very qualitative, which might surprise many people because it sits in the accounting department. So you have a very qualitative course, and you get to maybe Unit 8 of this course, and then you have very technical, mathematically driven calculations that students really are taken back by. It's a little surprising to them. And it's definitely very challenging for them because it's going into more of a pure mathematics computation. It's very different than the rest of the course. So it's not uncommon for instructors to either reduce coverage of sampling, leave that to the audit firms or the public accounting firms that students go and work for, or just skip audit sampling altogether. And this is also suggested by prior research in education. So we know that sampling is a challenging area for students. We know that professors often skip over this or reduce coverage, but auditing is a regulated profession. Since Enron and the Sarbanes-Oxley Act of 2002, Congress enacted an oversight board for public company audits. And so as a result, we have really rich evidence from our regulators that suggests that sampling is really an issue in practice. So for instance, regulators called the Public Company Accounting Oversight Board, or the PCAOB, have noted that there's an insufficient sample when auditors might look at financial transactions early in the year, but then don't properly update their testing through December 31st, which is the most common year end for public companies. They can sample from only part of the population. So when you're looking at a set of financial transactions, let's say cash, when you're looking at cash transactions, they only look at a portion of the company's population, not realizing that they took a sample from an incomplete population. And then they often are incentivized to take too small of a sample because, of course, we know that public accountants typically work long hours in busy season, so in that January, February, March timeframe. And so there is human incentive to want to do less work. And so as a result, sometimes staff auditors can game the sampling software to pull too small of a sample. I don't want to go ask the controller for 60 invoices. I want to go ask the controller for 30 invoices. And then often the PCAOB has talked about a tendency of some auditors to actually pull the sample of 60, so pull that larger sample, but actually not perform procedures on all items. And this type of error is likely to occur at the staff level, but has enormous consequences for the audit as a whole if it's not caught in the review process, and really for the capital markets. So this is an important problem for us to try to address in the classroom. So what was my initial plan? My initial plan was to have two parts of this case. The first part, I would cover principles of sampling, working with a vendor called Automation Services, Inc. So Automation Services, Inc. offers free sampling software for students. So we could get individual student licenses for what's called IDEA software, and that allows students to play with data sets and think about sampling and the consequences of their professional judgment when pulling a sample. After they pulled a sample, the intention of this project was for them to actually go ahead and test the sample using confirmation.com. So this case was supposed to be set up in the accounts receivable area of the financial statements, and they were actually going to confirm with the third-party customer that the customer did in fact owe this money or receivable to the company. And this can be done electronically, and this is something that is very new to auditing. Previously, for about the last 100 years, auditors have sent pieces of paper in the mail to companies, banks, and lawyers and customers to confirm cash, legal liabilities or contingencies, as well as these receivables. But confirmation.com has stepped in over the last several years and provided a secure electronic platform for auditors to communicate with these third parties. And third-party evidence is considered to be a very strong source of evidence for financial statement audits. So the intention was for students to be exposed to the sampling software, then go ahead and test their selected sample using this new technology to get audit evidence, confirmation.com. And then once they had the audit evidence from the confirmation.com software, which would be set up specifically for this case, that they would be able to extrapolate those results back in to the sampling software to conclude on the population of receivables and whether the company had fairly stated the receivable balance. So what happened? In part one, students did use the IDEA software by Automation Services, Inc. to explore several items that I just mentioned. They verified the completeness of the file. So in terms of the accounts receivable balance, they wanted to ensure that what was imported into the system actually matched the general ledger and was the complete accounts receivable population. After they ensured completeness, and we talked about regulator findings, they went ahead and they pulled a risk-based sample. So they looked at items that were considered particularly risky based on factors that they identified. It could have been how many days outstanding was the receivable, so how long has the customer owed that money to the company. They also looked at the size of the customer's balance. So do two customers represent most of the accounts receivable balance, owing the company millions of dollars, where the remaining customers only owe a small amount? After they pulled a risk-based sample, we actually explored data analytics through the IDEA software. So we ran a number of queries that we determined ahead of time to think about when entries were booked, whether there was suspicious memos with the entry, whether the entries included invoice numbers that were out of sequence or were beyond the number of invoices the company had said they had issued. So this was a really interesting addition into the case because data analytics has become very prevalent across business, but particularly in auditing, there's a large focus on data analytics right now. So students could see what data analytics might look like at a very basic level in this account. And so finally, in part one, they actually performed two types of statistical sampling. And so what they did is they did a classical variable sample, they pulled that, and then they pulled a monetary unit sample. So two types of statistical sampling. And what they were trying to do in completing these statistical samples is to ensure that the method they selected was compatible with the underlying nature of the population. So for instance, monetary unit sampling, the way it works, very briefly, is that it really is only good for testing risk of overstatement. So a company putting too many receivables on their financial statements or on their general ledger. And so students had to understand what the assumptions were of particular statistical sampling tools and make sure that the underlying population met these assumptions and had the specified risks so that we're using the correct statistical sample to actually test the company's accounts receivable. So in terms of some deliverables, I do think when you do anything new and innovative, and particularly when you use electronic software, it's always really good to guide the students step by step. So one of the first things we gave the students for part one of this case was a set of very basic case questions where they went through and they talked about some of the evidence that they put together to verify the completeness of the file and the import, and then they talked about why this was important. We did the same thing for each statistical sampling. What was the sample that you pulled, how many, what are the implications, what are the underlying assumptions. So we really guided students step by step with these questions of what knowledge we wanted them to gain from this experience. In addition to the step-by-step questions, we developed a part one and a part two little audit procedure checklist. So this was meant to guide the students when they were actually handing in the assessment or the assignment, that they actually completed every part of the case and were not missing anything. So we gave the students case questions, we gave them this audit procedure checklist, and we also importantly gave them technical guidance on how to get through the software. And the technical guidance was very direct. It looked like this. It did not give students the answers, but it pointed to areas where they could go and start each part of the project. So we didn't give them the answers, but we did tell them where to click. We told them the tech support number, and we guided them, of course, through our classes, but this was something that they could take home with them. So that they got the case questions, the checklist, and this technical guidance, as well as some support in class or hands-on support in class to complete this case. Okay, so what happened with part two? Unfortunately, Confirmation.com was not able to build us out an educational website for this class. I actually had used them previously to build out a website, but their own business demands did not meet the timing of this case. So this is where the plan changed a little bit from what I initially proposed. So what happened in part two? Instead of actually having the students go and test the sample that they pulled in the Confirmation.com system, I provided the students with the initial results of the confirmation testing that we told them was performed by a colleague in the firm's offshore center. So this is actually very realistic to what students would or could experience and practice. In addition to using data analytics, public accounting firms have begun since about 2009 to really leverage offshore centers and audit professionals in offshore centers to perform low-level accounting work. And so confirmation procedures is something that is typically sent. So what happened is the students receive the results of the confirmation testing, and they are asked to evaluate whether the responses from the customers are exceptions that require adjustments, or alternatively support the accounts receivable balance that is reflected in the client's general ledger. So there were 6 adjustments required for this case, and that's an important item to mention. The way we designed the case, and I'm saying we because I worked in conjunction with some other professors at various universities, but the way that we designed the case was that with the inputs we advised the students to make in terms of risk and the size of the account, and various assumptions that the engagement team had decided upon, everyone got to the same final sample. So by getting to the same final sample, they are then all getting the same initial results of the confirmation testing, and they should end up with the same 6 adjustments that need to go back into the IDEA software. So within the IDEA software, there's an audited balance column, and so for the accounts that had issues, they went in and they changed those 6 customer balances to the correct balance, which was typically 0, meaning the company had recognized a receivable that they could actually not collect or was not money owed to them. And then once they made those adjustments, they extrapolated this testing to the entire population to try to determine whether the company's accounts receivable balance was fairly stated. And once they have that extrapolated balance, then they discuss whether the account is materially misstated and how to document their conclusion in the final portion of this case, which was an audit testing memo. So what's interesting about this case is we designed it particularly so that it would be very gray, not black and white, if there was in fact a material misstatement. So the known errors of the population were below what was considered to be a material misstatement, but the projected errors, or that extrapolated piece of the sample, was actually materially misstated. And so students had a really robust dialogue about what they would tell the client and how they would convince the client that an adjustment to the financial statements was needed before they could be released to the public and considered accurate. So in terms of the final deliverable for part 2, they still had to answer the end of the case questions, which was actually question 8. So they went through and they put down the extrapolated results here. But then as part of question 8B, they actually summarized their understanding in a write-up. And so this case write-up was 1 to 2 pages. So ultimately they turned in their 8 case questions that they wrote right in the Word document we provided. They turned in that audit checklist, and they turned in a 1 to 2 page memo about the case. And how I actually did this in my class is I did it over several weeks. I started the sampling portion of the case in the week where I did cover sampling, so that was over 2 class periods. We started and touched base on part 1 of the case. And then immediately following the sampling chapter, I covered accounts receivable, which is the account that we actually sampled in this case. And so over the second week, I asked them to complete part 2 of the case, and then I gave them a week to ask any questions and finalize their documentation. So I would say that typically I assign this case over 2 to 2.5 weeks. So in terms of measuring student outcomes, unfortunately, because this was such a challenging area for students to begin with, and this is why I actually wrote the mini-grant, I don't have a benchmark before the case to compare student performance to. But I did give a sampling quiz when I used the case over 3 semesters, and the sampling quiz consisted of 10 questions. It could only help the students, so it didn't count against them, but they got 1 extra credit point if they essentially got an 80 or higher, and they got 2 extra credit points if they got 100. And so as you can see here, in the spring of 2015 and the fall of 2015, I only ran the sampling portion of the case. We did not extrapolate the results. And students scored fairly well in between an 80 or a 90 out of the 10 questions on the quiz, suggesting that they really understood sampling at this point. And then in spring of 2016, I did use part 1 and part 2 of the case in my class, and students again scored very highly. That is all I have in terms of reviewing my final report for this Vital mini-grant. If anyone has any questions or concerns, I would welcome you to reach out to me. I really am appreciative of Vital's support with this mini-grant and would highly recommend any professor who's interested in doing something like this in their class to apply and to reach out to Vital for their help. Thanks so much.